So we have this first story from everyone's favorite state-funded, or what did Twitter call it? State-affiliated media. NPR. Tennessee House votes not to expel a second Democratic member over gun protest. So I chose NPR just because I love how they're going to smooth out the language here.
Anti-gun protest, is that
That's
what
right.
it is?
Yeah.
What was the January 6th? How was that then?
That was just a peaceful parade. Peaceful parade, yeah. All right, they say after
costume
voting...
party even.
Costume, that's right. Costume party. After voting, the police escorts for people in costume. After voting to expel a Tennessee state rep for leading a raucous protest, from the House floor calling for gun law reform, the Republican-led body declined to expel a second member. In a 65-30 vote, lawmakers failed to pass a motion that would remove Rep. Gloria Johnson, who represents about 70,000 Tennesseans in Knoxville. Cheers erupted, blah, blah, blah. Three lawmakers acknowledged they didn't follow the rules of order or decorum by speaking out without being formally recognized, but they're facing a disciplinary measure that's only been used twice since the 1800s. Gee, I wonder why it is that they're going after these here protesters. Could it be, is it this story I have right here? Here we go. From 2019, activist Justin Jones banned from Capitol after alleged assault on Speaker Glenn Casada. Oh. So it was an insurrection, but I'm going to skip over the pleasantries, and I'm going to skip right to the part where I talk about civil war. And I'll explain it in this way. A few years ago, an individual was, I believe, arrested. I want to make sure I get that right. I believe it was banned from the Capitol. And let's see, blah, blah, blah. Justin Jones, 23, was charged with 2 counts of misdemeanor assault and 1 count of disorderly conduct after authorities say he threw a cup of coffee into an elevator, striking Casada and Rep. Deborah Moody, a Republican from Covington. Jones, a Vanderbilt student, and more than a dozen other protesters assembled outside the House chamber on Thursday to protest the bust of Nathan Bedford Forrest, a Confederate general. So this is 2019. He actually attacked members of the legislature. And then a few years later, he's in it. So, I wouldn't call throwing coffee at someone like a caning or anything like that. But what I think we're continually seeing with the indictment of Donald Trump and where everything is going, is that the bifurcation of American culture is now within the confines of our state and federal governments, to the point where you actually have a person who physically attacked Republicans in office. You'd think that would have been news in the first place. It's like, hey, remember that guy who attacked the legislature? He got elected. He's here now. Well, now he's being thrown out again. He's being expelled. And they're saying, you can't keep him out. He will be back. I can only imagine that as we see more of this at the state level, combined with the false charges against Donald Trump, we are heading towards, whatever you want to call it, this country being split in half.
Well, it's one. I would consider it to be one part of the country has decided just to leave in terms of refusing to follow the basic principles. I call it the American way. That we have this rising communism within the Democratic Party. They reject what we all have believed in, or we Americans have commonly approved of, which is the rule of law. We have a Republican form of government. We don't vote by mob rule, which is what they try to do in Tennessee. Another basic respect for civil liberties and civil rights. And the communists don't believe in any of that. They're rejecting it. So, they'll try to overturn a legislature in Tennessee. They'll try to attack the Supreme Court here in Washington, D.C. They try to jail their political opponents in the form of Donald Trump. We see this now with the January 6th grand jury investigations, where they're trying to jail people for exercising their First Amendment rights under the state federal constitutional law to dispute an election. So, they're kind of throwing out the window all the sort of norms that we used to believe in. The divorce is they're abandoning the family.
They believe,
or even better, even worse, trying to destroy it.
They believe might makes right. That's it.
Well, it's the communists. They can call themselves whatever they want. They're not going to call themselves communists, Marxists.
Well, a lot
Antifa.
of them actually do.
Right. But this is the left. This is the totalitarian impulse of the left, and it's been unhinged. And I've been observing politics for longer than I care to admit to. Rarely would I say something is communist. But we're facing this communist revolutionary moment over the last 2 years, 3 years. And I don't know. We're an undiscovered country when it comes to that.
You know what my favorite part of this is? We have this story from the Daily Mail. Biden blasts shocking and undemocratic Tennessee House of Representatives for vote to expel one of 3 Democratic lawmakers. So if you, as a lawmaker, join a violent, call it a riot, because they were fighting with cops and they were actually blocking a legislator in the bathroom, and he had to be like hugging police officers as they try and pull him through, an angry crowd screaming and yelling. Biden calls it undemocratic to remove the people who did that.
Right.
So what would you call January 6th?
What would you call your Justice Department trying to jail your predecessor for a speech where he told people to go peaceably protest about the election? So Biden is approving of an insurrection in Tennessee while trying to jail Trump on pretextual charges for inciting violence in Washington, D.C.
And the problem is, I see that conservatives keep trying to argue with the left about why they're right. And it's like, bro, they don't care.
Yeah, there's
The
really
left's
power
not trying to win you
politics.
over. I mean, if you look at the news coverage of the Tennessee event, I mean, USA Today put out this huge, the coverage of what happened at Tennessee is completely wrong. Don't believe any of it. These right-wing commentators are crazy. They're perpetrating rumors. Even with Justin Jones in the chamber, they were saying, oh, it's an impromptu protest. They didn't plan it at all. It's just that they had supporters in the balcony and they strategically knew when to get up and start protesting on the floor. I mean, they are telling you one story, not to win conservatives over, but to completely solidify their base.
I'm not saying they're trying to win conservatives over. Of course they aren't. I'm saying conservatives are trying to win them over, and they're pretending like it's possible. Or for some, maybe not even that. For some reason, there are conservatives who think that facts care about feelings. That that Ben Shapiro standing up and speaking at a university is going to convince people. Some, but very few, right? This show, the work you do, you go to these people and show them evidence, and they'll go, oh, wow. And then what they'll do is they'll take the information and they'll be like, they're on to us. We got to adjust our strategy and try and find a different way to exploit and gain power.
Yeah. Well, I would suggest that the way to think about what Ben does, what we're all doing really, is we're trying to educate the American people and showing leadership for those of us who are concerned about these issues. The left, as you point out, isn't going to be convinced, but we got to speak out and provide leadership and the truth and let people know there are people who know what's going on, and this is the way forward.
But I get that. I'm saying there are people arguing with leftists.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Well, there are no standards. I mean, the big question I've been asked about on the news recently with the Trump thing is, what about the double standards? As if they care about double standards. There's one standard. Jail them and protect us
the one
as far as the left is going. I mean, they're being perfectly consistent, which is no rules. We go after you, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Right. And then where it's what we're talking about with Dave Smith, the Republicans are the Washington Generals and the Democrats are the Globetrotters. That's been an analogy for several years now. The Democrats pretend like Republicans are running circles around them when the Republicans do literally nothing. And then the Democrats steamroll everything, quite literally indicting Donald Trump on nothing.
And two impeachments.
Over nothing.
And they're still nervous about impeaching one of his cabinet officials who is partly responsible for the most significant human trafficking operation in the history of man, the crisis at the southern border. I start talking about Biden impeachment, people get very nervous in Washington, D.C. Let's have an inquiry into what Biden's done. I mean, we had news not even 2 weeks ago.
Well, I mean,
that further confirming that millions of dollars were laundered through the Biden family enterprises from the Chinese communists. Has there been any leadership from the House on pursuing impeachment for that? It doesn't mean they're not doing some good investigative work here. But to me, there's this urgency and there's this crisis related to the rule of law. Our republic is tottering. It is tottering. And we need leaders that recognize the problem and respond with the appropriate urgency.
I think we're past that point. I mean, with what's happening in Tennessee, with what's happening with Trump, I mean, and especially with Trump. But I think it's important to point out Tennessee shows the more grassroots level of things, the state level, the local level. It's happening there, the bifurcation. Donald Trump is the first former president to be indicted. And the charges are completely bunk.
Right.
Even Chris Hayes on MSNBC is like, yeah, there's nothing here. I mean, the statute of limitations is up. What is this? They're doing it anyway because they don't care. They are making their moves in slow, gradual ways that are difficult to defend against. And Donald Trump, in my opinion, should not have surrendered. He should have said, file the paperwork, let me know. And then when the media came out and said, there's two things they would have gained by this. The media came out and said, this indictment is bunk. Trump would have been like, well, I don't know what's going on. I mean, MSNBC said there was nothing here. So what am I supposed to do? He could have used them. And if they do want to pursue it, knowing there's no underlying crime, so the statute of limitations is up, they would have to contact Ron DeSantis' administration for extradition. And if DeSantis did extradite Trump, he would be out of the GOP primary like that. Trump would completely just knock him out and have nothing to worry about. But that DeSantis probably wouldn't do anything. And knowing that, what would end up happening is Trump would be sitting in his home. He'd say, I don't know anything about this. They're free to file whatever legal paperwork they want, and we'll read it. And then when Bragg fails to get any support from the cultural left, fails to get an extradition, he'd be sitting there confused saying, what do I do? No one's going to be, and like only the weirdos on Twitter are going to be calling for escalation. So Trump would have just been like, I don't know what happened to that thing.
Well, the weirdos on Twitter seem to be running our establishment these days. I mean, Bragg, but his extremist approach here, with the help of Lanny Davis, an old Clinton lawyer who's representing Michael Cohen, that lawyer he brought in from the Biden administration, who's a longtime Obama hand, and these other leftists, and the Soros approach to governance, which is to abuse the justice system to target your political enemies. And, that's straight out of the Twitter sphere, that sort of crazy anti-Trumpism. And it's so dangerous. And I say there's like this storm front all across the eastern seaboard, from Georgia, Fulton County, same crowd, same specious allegations trying to abuse Trump for disputing an election, up here in Washington, D.C. with Biden and his Justice Department targeting and harassing Trump, and up in New York. I tell you, I think he's going to get indicted in multiple jurisdictions. And
Trump?
Yeah, and I tell you, Republicans have got to understand that this is a crisis that deserves urgent attention. They should be cutting off funding to the Justice Department as appropriate to curtail these abusive investigations, defund New York more or less, defund Fulton County, Georgia more or less. Every power available to them under law should be used to make sure that Trump isn't kept as a political prisoner.
Thanks for watching this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. Hang out with us live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. and become a member over at timcast.com for uncensored, members-only shows exclusive. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.